Should have a really interesting discussion here today. We've got this roundtable and collated a panel hosted here by the CIPHE on sort of low temperature heating. That's going to be the main focus today. So we're bringing the discussion around the role of the heating engineer and the system install and how that's changing for a low carbon future. I know there's been some recent consultations managed by the CIPHE around this agenda. So we're going to discuss some of the findings from that, which Paul Harmer here, lead technical consultant from the CIPHE, is going to present. And then we've got some time to get into a bit of a discussion around the future agenda here and take some questions as well from you all. So there's a Q&A feature and there's a chat box, so please say hello and pop in your questions. We'll have a bit of a discussion up front first, and also joining us today for that is Ilias, who's a partner at Ecuity, Ian Rippin, CEO of MTS, Mark Wilkins here, who's the head of training at Vaillant, and Martyn Bridges, who is the technical director of Worcester Bosch. So thank you, Worcester Bosch. Thank you everyone for taking the time out and joining us here today. Why don't we start, Paul, do you want to start with some of the findings from the recent consultation process that you've been running on this?
Sure.
And then we'll get into some questions.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Yeah, so as you can see on the screen now, it's just, we put this simple infographic on there just to give installers, try and focus their minds on what we're looking to achieve here. So at the Institute and all the stakeholders, we've brought everyone together with a very much of a technology agnostic approach. So it's all about, this qualification is all about the system, because as we all know, no matter what heat generator you connect to the system, if the system's not designed right, if it's not specified right, then you're not going to get the best out of that heat generator. So it's really just a simple roadmap, as you can see on there, is that what we're trying to achieve here is to not reskill the workforce, and again there's different levels, is upskill slightly and just refocus to new technologies as we move towards a decarbonised heating system. So the idea of this was to be inclusive. You know, the Institute is an educational charity. Our whole purpose is to protect the safety, health and welfare of the public. So, and being an ex-installer myself, I've been in the industry sort of 20 odd years. I've seen some changes and I've felt some pain along the way. And when we have these things happen, it's really, I've always said to myself, I really want to have a voice as an installer. And the idea is to give the installer a voice and bring the consumer and the installer along on this journey. So if you just go to the first slide, I've just picked some summary. So really, this is just to focus our minds to say that this is not just a course for heat pumps. It's for the future system, the low carbon system, whether it's a hydrogen boiler, a gas boiler, a heat pump, bio oil, bio LPG or biomass, or other technologies such as solar. This is a core course, core competencies. So if you just flick on to the next slide, Ben. I was really, really impressed with the number of people that took their time out to really have a go at this. And we had sort of over 500 responses in total, people that have had a go at the survey. As you can see, do you agree with the need for this qualification? Well, yeah, we've got quite a high, I think everyone agreed in the panel that it was very positive to see that installers are looking to engage with this and they recognise its importance as we look to protect the consumer as well as deliver a solution that will help save carbon and help save the planet. We move to the next slide. This one was more about, as an installer, how do you think us as an industry or government should implement this new framework for installers? And as you can see there, it was split between just an industry-led at 47.5%, where we create the standards, the accreditation is owned by industry, and the other high one was 45, pretty similar, was apart from government. So it's clear that a lot of the people who took the survey believe that government has to come in at some point and help regulate along the way. So next slide. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about the way we learn, the way we teach, the role of digital innovation in the future. You know, we've seen what happened recently, how everyone's been forced into engaging with digital, and there's a massive adoption of new means of learning, new means of training. And, you know, we thought we'd ask a question. Do you believe that the industry needs a sort of standard? And I use the word standardised because standards, regulations move on. And again, with low temperature heating, we're doing everything we can at the CIPHE to look at those standards and make sure across the board we're all following the same rules and procedures. So again, very high. Industry spoke to us. Well, we asked industry, and industry came back and said, yeah, we believe a standardised set of digital tools would help. So, and then just a brief summary of those. The next slide is more about the next steps. And I'd like to point out, we've been involved with BEIS, quite heavily supporting BEIS, and our group have managed to pull together such a diverse set of stakeholders, from heat pump manufacturers to boiler manufacturers and all other trade bodies, to pull together, work together for the future benefit of our industry and the consumer. And so the process is still inclusive. So as from August, we're looking to go on that road towards off-qual registration. So it's a regulated qualification. So you can see between August and December now, we've got these little milestones where we'll have a technical panel across industry that are going to make sure that we're happy with a standardised approach. So, so yeah, I hope that was informative. I am extremely grateful, and I've made it aware on social media, extremely grateful for everyone's time and the installers that took out their valuable time to, you know, give us some of their insights. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
So why don't we bring in guys on the panel to sort of reflect on this, and let's talk a bit more about this. You know, the roadmap, I guess, for installers to be a low carbon heating installer. You know, how are they going to learn the necessary skills and that in the future? What do we think that roadmap looks like? Could I ask anyone to come in here? Paul, do you want to?
I can do, but I'm happy to open it up to one of the other panel members if anyone's got anything to say. Martyn, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's obviously it's necessary. The government now we're on this net zero carbon trajectory. They need to get every house sort of agnostic to any technology. So we know heat pumps will not work particularly well at high flow temperatures. Their efficiency goes down. The support backup heating system, generally it's immersion heaters, start to kick in. So I can understand the approach of let's get every house where we can ready for any type of low carbon heating form. Boilers will also, of course, perform at both temperature ranges. They're pretty good at high temperatures, but they're certainly a lot better at low temperatures. So if we can get the heating system to be, you know, warm enough for the home at sort of 40, 45 centigrade flow and return temperatures, then yeah, we have hit the nail on the head. We've achieved what the government want to see. We're so used, though, to sizing radiators for significantly higher flow and return temperatures. And in recent years, sizing them on a 20 degrees C differential rather than the traditional 11 centigrade differential. So to remind installers, many of them, virtually all of them, would have done this in their college days, how to size radiator systems, underfloor heating, etc. But to remind them that this is how you do it, and to also do it with a lower temperature differential. And that, as Paul, you and I have chatted in recent days, when you're operating on temperature differentials significantly lower than the original 20C or it was designed to do, then you hit quite a few other issues such as resistance factors through the pump, through the pipework and the valves, etc. So it isn't just a case of making sure the radiator will operate at this low flow temperature. There are pipework resistances and things to take into account. And it's something, you know, when we changed the condensing boilers, not much of this was approached. It was just, here's how the boiler differs from a non-condensing boiler. So to actually go back to almost basic heating system principles and designs is very necessary. It's quite a short time scale we have, but again, because there's knowledge there already, we're not exactly starting from scratch. So I think to actually create the course, the syllabus for it, and then the rollout should, well, that's unknown at the moment when the actual training would commence, but we will be in a position to be able to offer as an industry that training sort of latter end of this year, maybe early next year.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, you know, spot on there, Martyn, regarding as we move towards high flow rates, smaller delta T's, it becomes a bit more critical that we understand these core principles. One thing that we did have a question in the survey, which was we wanted installers to answer, was about consumer engagement. And what we're trying to do is bring the consumer on this journey as well. And, you know, at any given point, I remember my days when I used to sit in the lounge with Mrs. Miggins having a cup of coffee, talking about a heating system. And I used to put a bit of time into understanding their behaviours, how they use their heating system, how they use their hot water system. And I think that, for me, is critical now as we move forward to decarbonise. So we want to try and encourage that installer consumer engagement, don't we, Martyn?
That's probably my main worry, the consumer. I've no fear that the installers will grasp this quite comfortably, but homeowners, if the heating system now performs differently to heating systems they've been used to, that's by and large has always presented us with issues. Even today, when Boiler Plus was introduced 2 years or so ago, the amount of phone calls we get from homeowners now saying that the radiators don't operate as hot as they used to. And it's simply because there's either a weather sensor or a load compensation device on the system. The air temperature in the room is still, you know, what they want it to be, but the radiators themselves, because they're not stinging hot, they think there's something wrong. So when we lower the flow and return temperatures even more into radiators, I am slightly wary of the fact that the homeowner, householder, is going to think there's something wrong when there isn't. So their education can't just be relied upon by the installer. There must be some public awareness as well about this.
Just to come on, if I may come in on that point, Martyn. Yeah, I mean, one of the pieces of research that MCS did a while ago identified that the biggest influence over a consumer's purchase of a renewable energy solution is their existing installer. That's often the case, that it's a distressed purchase, you know, the boiler's gone wrong. So I think this is a fantastic initiative in terms of educating or reminding, really, refreshing some of those skills that might have been learned at college. Because if an installer, if a contractor can convey what the benefits are of renewable energy and at the point of where that decision is being made, usually in that distressed purchase type environment, then they can help educate their customer. Of course, it can't be just about the installer influencing the consumer. It needs to be a wider education for consumers, very different heating experience, a different energy experience that this represents. But I think you've got to start somewhere, and you've got to start with those installers who are keen to embrace renewable energy, all the forecasts, all the way through to net zero carbon by 2050. We've got to start now. And, you know, time's ticking, isn't it? And some of the initiatives we're seeing from government, I hope over the next 2 or 3 years, will really help the sector get going with that, because it's at a low level now. But education, yeah, who said it? Education, education, education.
Yeah.
Location, location.
Here, but
that was you, Ian.
Let me bring Ilias in on this as well. You know, in terms of the, you know, we're talking about, you know, what are the policy levers? What are the, you know, how can government policy really shape the future here?
I mean, I think this is sort of the roadmap is a great initiative as well. And I would say we thought that 80% reduction of emissions in heating was a very big challenge. Actually now with net zero, this is quite a challenge. And, you know, we need to see significant change in the heating mix moving forwards in this decade, and more than we would have expected. Say this is a big challenge also because progress in decarbonizing emissions, from heating has been very limited so far. So, I mean, the Committee on Climate Change model says 2 million heat pump installations in the domestic sector by 2030. We see significant investment in hydrogen and sort of biofuels. Bio-LPG is a sector that I'm quite familiar with, heat networks as well. But I think it feels unlikely that there have to be gains during this decade. It feels unlikely that it feels possible that during this decade, still by 2030, most of heating systems are likely to be boilers. So I think a big challenge during this decade is to sort of pave the way to create an installer base that has the skills available to drive forward the low carbon heat transition, which is necessary. And we've seen that, for instance, the government is considering this. I've seen the tender from the 1-year review of Boiler Plus, which includes a review of whether we can establish a maximum temperature threshold for retrofit boilers. And I feel like the work that you're talking about fits into sort of the thinking as to whether this would be, this would be possible, and is also feeds into the discussion around how we upskill the installer base to make the transition required during this decade, but also beyond, because making all new heating systems low carbon this decade is a big challenge, and it probably won't be the case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. I'll come back to you in a minute. Yes, I just want to bring sort of Mark into the discussion now. So Mark, any of kind of your reflections on this roadmap, on this conversation?
I think, yeah, first of all, the survey, the work that's ongoing is very, very positive. It's important for industry to grasp this and to drive forward. We know that there are skills gaps, and we know that there are challenges facing us in future with an aging workforce and the need to bring new blood into the industry. So I think it's great that the industry is grabbing hold. I don't think what's going to be taught is anything hugely new. There may be some practices and processes that have been forgotten. So it's more about refresher training and using it in maybe new ways. So pipe sizing, heat emitter sizing, pump sizing. These are all things that should be done today. But this is taking it to a lower temperature application. So it's more about refresher training, I think, than brand new information, but using it in a new way and a new application. I also think that it's also very important to separate skills from quality marks and quality schemes. The skills are fundamental for the industry moving forward as we decarbonise, but the operators of the schemes do have to recognise these courses. And it's good to see that we've got Ian here as well, involved in this from the MCS side and engaged in the discussion. So from that point, we join up industry, we join up the scheme operators. So really, generally, very, very positive view of the initiative and the way the roadmap is taking us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Mark. And I'll come to Ian with actually one of the first questions that we've had in here. Slightly, this is from Mark Percy. So thanks for that. But about perhaps do we need more policing along with training? Do we have too many ticking boxes exercises going on? Sort of, how would you see that? How do you see that evolving in the future?
Yeah. I mean, you might be surprised to hear from the Chief Exec of MCS that I would agree wholeheartedly with that. Actually, what we need is to be reassuring ourselves that we've got the right competency out there, because if we can get quality first initiative, we get less compliance issues, less consumer complaints. The whole sector then gets dragged down by a lack of confidence in the solutions that we're all passionate about. So I think the new MCS, if I can use that phraseology, is something, because I'm the new chief exec, I want MCS to be less about paperwork, office-based assessments of compliance, and more about making sure we've got competent, really great technicians in the field. And leading on from what Mark was saying, I think, you know, training's a great start, isn't it? And so this initiative is fantastic, but it needs to dovetail with how you then work with a quality scheme like MCS. So if we're looking for the same things and recognising the same things, which we will be, then it kind of that experience from classroom into the field flows. And then you can start to see whether people have actually learned. It's a bit like that driving test analogy. You learn to drive once you pass your test. You know, so I think that's important, that the MCS is able to wrap itself around the sector without being high cost and a pain in the backside. Actually, it's about making sure that people can deliver great installations for consumers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thanks, Ian. Okay, so another question now from Kevin, and maybe this is one for you, Ilias. You know, Kevin asks, isn't this the time that government should get behind the industry and make the consumer aware of the benefits of low temperature heating? You know, how much is this really about the government awareness campaign as it is about regulation, accreditation, and all of that? How do you see that?
Yeah, I think the first step is to convince the government that this is something worth pursuing. And based on the noises coming from the government in terms of the 1-year review of Boiler Plus, well, that's the 2-year review of Boiler Plus rather, this is something that the government is considering, so establishing a maximum flow temperature threshold for retrofit heating systems. And then I think if this is the way the government wants to proceed, then it should also be behind this effort in terms of awareness raising. Perhaps, and that's sort of another idea is whether sort of the various grants that become available by government, like the green grants, clean heat grants, to support heat pumps, could also be or sort of target support towards more efficient heating systems than what is prescribed by regulation. So I think there are many ways that the government could support this effort in terms of awareness raising, also using maybe some of the subsidy or the sort of some of the grants available to support best practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just can I just add to that?
Yeah, go.
Training is important, and it is one of the levers that we have as we move towards a decarbonised future. But this goes across a number of areas. It's important to get the right policy in place, important to get the right government funding and government support in place, important to get the right training in place, the right quality schemes. So training in isolation isn't going to work. It is a joined up, multi-lever approach that we need. And a huge part of that as well is going to be consumer awareness. Because you're pushing on a closed door unless the consumer is willing to engage in that side of things. So it's a joined up across the spectrum initiative that we need.
Mm-hmm. Ben, if I can just add to that, I mean, what government are really reaching out to industry. You know, there's a climate emergency. They're keen to put the right policies in place, and that's why industry needs to pull together and show government that we're united, we're with you, and we're moving forward. And that's what we've got. I think we're going to start to need a bit more of a push from government now and a bit of a direction, because industry's pulling together here. We're demonstrating it. We just need that push from government.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And just on maybe another question here from Mark, more around slightly more technical one. Maybe I'll go back to Mark on this one. But particularly for older houses, suggest unless we have massive grants available, it is going to be really difficult, isn't it? What are the major challenges that we're facing? In terms of you can't really do it with perhaps the radiator sizes that we've got. You need larger flow and returns. Does lower temperature just mean bigger everything? Like, how are we going to kind of overcome some of these barriers, Mark?
It's not going to be easy. If it was, it would have been done by now. And again, there's the awareness and the education from the installer, from the designer is fundamental. There is a process to go through when you're looking at a property, understanding the heat loss of the property, understanding what the customer's requirements are and how they'll be using the system. Understanding the technologies and what they need, making sure that you get your designs right for the heat emitter system, for the pump sizing, for the pipe sizing. These are all things that the workforce know about and know how to do, but maybe don't do as frequently as they could do, because the sort of the incumbent technology is fairly forgiving at the moment. So we need to, it's again a proper joined up approach to understanding the needs of the property and of the customer.
And what was going on, Paul?
I was just going to mention that's part of the reason for this green grants scheme is to, you look at a property and is it the right idea to suddenly put the heat generator in and go from there, or do you need to look at, as we spoke about the insulation? Can we make a heating system? Will it bring the cost down of that heating system if we make those small, high-impact, low-cost measures such as loft insulation, if it's a filled cavity? So, and that's the challenge I think industry's got, is how do we bring all that together? And that's what industry's looking at.
And can I just flip it around slightly and just ask you a question out here, maybe to you, Paul, or anyone else who wants to jump in? But what will happen if the industry doesn't take a proactive lead on this? Presumably we won't reach net zero, or do you think? I don't know.
That's from a policy perspective. If the industry doesn't take the lead, then that would call for further intervention or regulation from government. So I guess it is in the industry's interest to come up with the ideas, I suppose, than leave that to government. But I also think that industry taking the lead gives the right signal to consumers. It's necessary to carry the consumer along the journey. So the industry has to take the lead to help the government, but also sort of carry the consumer along the journey for heat decarbonization. And I think it's absolutely key. Yeah.
And Ian, you're sort of nodding along now.
Yeah. I mean, someone who's I'm 18 months in this sector, and I think there's been recently an outbreak of collaboration and enthusiasm for everybody to work together with our partners in BEIS and in government. It's we have to do this together. I mean, net zero carbon by 2050 is a legal requirement. So we're being held to account, and we should all have a voice, but we're all going to have to compromise to get end game. So I think I'm enthused by initiatives like this, and it's got my full support. But I realise that it has consequences for MCS. MCS needs to adapt to be right for this market. And I hope everybody else thinks the same way, really. We've got to do it together. We've got to help people doing the real jobs of installing this for consumers. We've got to help them as best we can and not hinder them with more paperwork and more bureaucracy. So yeah, keep it simple would be my cry.
Yeah, and also, I mean, just on another kind of more practical point around the consumer, customers go for the cheapest price. It's a point we've just had made by a couple of people in the audience. Maybe, Martyn, how are we gonna, what's the answer there? Like, in terms of, is it education? Is it, that's almost like it's a fact of life, isn't it? Like, consumers are going to go for the cheapest price, so we need to kind of be aware of that and make it practical.
It's so tough. I don't know, because what they're they're so used to is operating their heating system intermittently and at high temperatures. Now, to operate the heating system now in a steady state condition, if that's what's needed to bring the rooms up to the right temperature, which is probably likely at this low flow and return temperature. So in other words, you are leaving the heating running, albeit with night setbacks and things like that. That's going to be alien. They will believe that they are wasting money. And then, of course, these lower radiator surface temperatures, it's habit. You go out for a walk and come back in and put your backside against the hot radiator to thaw yourself out. So that's going to be interesting. We had similar things by, what was it now, 30 odd years ago, when combi boilers were starting to get popular. And homeowners were so used to scalding hot water coming from a hot water cylinder, and now they were getting instantly heated water at a slightly lower temperature, but usable at that time. So a lot of homeowners used to ring and complain. They would put their hand under the hot tap running water into the bath and think, well, that's not very hot. So we had to then try and change their minds to say, well, don't feel the water being issued from the tap, feel the bath water you're accumulating, and then you'll find that that's probably more than you actually need. Because again, the habit was fill the bath with scalding hot water, then add like 10 gallons of freezing cold water to bring it up to more or less the same temperature the boiler was delivering from a combi. So we've been through educational bits in the past, but I don't know, it's my biggest worry is that the homeowner will think somebody's given them a lesser service, a lesser heating system than they have today. And let's not probably forget that with very few, there are, of course, totally brand new heating systems that get installed, but most of the time it's boiler replacements and perhaps an extra radiator or a new radiator. But it isn't typical that the heating system gets touched much at all. They might get flushed and cleansed. They might fit TRVs if they haven't got them already. But to now for the installer to have to go in that home, and the plan is that the boiler's failed and they will need a new heat generator of some description, they will now have to size the radiators up against the heat loss of the home and see whether the existing radiator system can be operated on lower flow and return temperatures. A lot of the time, that's probably very possible. We have a lot of data on that. We monitor some, I think it's 47,000 boilers in properties, and just naturally they behave quite often differently to what you expect. Quite often the average flow temperature from, well, most of the time the average flow temperature from these boilers is around 60 centigrade going into the radiators. So the heat either can't get out of the boiler quickly enough, or the boiler thermostat's been set rather mid-range anyhow. But we're going to drop that even lower if the radiators are large enough to sort of 45 centigrade. So every faith the installers will be able to technically do what's being asked of them. It is just the homeowner and their changing behaviour is a really
it's a big behavioural challenge, isn't it? And understanding behaviour. I think is what you were going at an earlier point, wasn't it, about like how people use their heating system today and therefore their needs. And obviously that different types of people, everyone's got kind of different needs, and so it's about understanding that. I want to also just additionally, what about vulnerable consumers as a group sort of within that? What sort of consideration are we taking here? You've got a few people sort of nodding heads. Who'd like to take a stab at that? I don't know.
I say, as the institute, I'll repeat, we're there to protect the safety, health, and welfare of the public. So quite happily, everyone's happy just to come in on there. And you're right, Martyn's spot on. Behaviour number one. Say looking at the hot water, for example, 17.5 million. I don't know, was there homes in the UK running off an instantaneous hot water system, combi boiler. We're going to a more decarbonised home. We're going to see an increase in hot water cylinders being installed. So, and with all that, we've now got to be more mindful of how we design the hot water storage system and the distribution network to give the consumer a similar or better in some circumstances. So from a vulnerable perspective, an example might be, you've got someone, I've heard a story of sort of a gentleman, an old gentleman who's got arthritis, and he's having that many showers and baths in the morning to get himself back to life. You know, I know I shouldn't say that word, but, you know, it's waking his body up. He's trying to get the heat into him. And, you know, it was a 2-bed house, 500 litre cylinder. So you would never in a month of Sundays as an installer go and put a 500 litre cylinder in. But that's quite an extreme example, but it highlights the need for the installer to understand the consumer more as we move forward. So again, we've also got the fuel poor as well. We've got to be mindful of the fuel poor. Yeah. And there's a big focus. I know the Centre for the new National Centre for the Decarbonisation of Heat that we're all talking about, that there's a big focus on fuel poor areas. So yeah.
I think as well, the government could have taken the easy route, because you could still, and it may well be the case, that a good proportion of properties, particularly those which have a combi boiler installed, it's going to be very difficult to put anything else back in that house other than another combi boiler running from a greener gas. And in the short term, that's likely to have natural gas, biomethane, perhaps a small blend of hydrogen in there. But ultimately, to decarbonise the country and still use gas, it's got to go to something like hydrogen, of course. And if that was the case, then it's fairly easy. You wouldn't have to have any behavioural change. You wouldn't have to change the radiators, pipework, or anything like that. You know, the boiler will run at high temperatures with zero carbon. But I know they're interested, and understandably so, and I agree with it. There is no magical singular fix for all this. And where possible, the efficiency of the boilers is always going to be enhanced at lower temperatures. You will use less gas if you're running at lower temperatures. So, yeah, it's a heck of a challenge, and it's never really... At the moment, people who have heat pumps, by and large, either want one, they've asked their installer to install one for them, or they may be in social housing where that's the policy of the local authority. And again, that's very commendable as well, and it's a fine technology. But when you use low temperature heat pumps and a low temperature heating system, these behavioural changes and radiator temperature changes we're going to have to try and confront.
Yeah, can I just Ilias, actually just take another question? I'm just going to slightly move on from that. It's a challenge almost really from Liam. Here you guys, you know, just around qualifications and the costs of doing the more training programs, and the risk, I suppose, that it's money and time out for installers to go and do it, and how much changes with the qualifications. So what's the best way of going about that? How are we, it's something we've got to be quite mindful of, I think, isn't it? Many people kind of prove their competency already, just how we're going to recognize that in the future.
Cost is always an issue. It's one of the first things I used to moan about when I was on the tools. Here we go again, another scheme, another course. But one thing I did notice back in the day was, a tick box. I agree. There's a lot of responses on the consultation about this tick box sort of theme we've got with education, and and I've got to take a day off work and 2 days off work. I completely empathise with them because I was there doing the same moaning, saying the same things, and I totally agree with it. So it is a challenge, but I think what we need to do is try and simplify the routes, especially for new entrants as well. It's giving them that roadmap, simple roadmap of what do I need to do to install that equipment? And what this is there for is core. It's bringing the core competencies. People are going to say, well, actually, where does this fit in with the apprenticeships? Well, again, the apprenticeship scheme is going to have to start to, when it comes up for review, it's going to have to start looking at, we're going to have to try and standardise everything across there. It's not just about the existing workforce, it's about the new entrants as well. But the biggest one for me, again, if I'm going to put myself in installer's shoes again, when I go out to that house and knock on that door to sell my services, to sell a piece of equipment, how much effort and time have I got to put in to educating that consumer? That's number one, to get that job. So if I'm going in there and I'm trying to sell, it could be a hydrogen boiler at the same time as a heat pump. How much time have I got to put into that process? That's an added cost. And, you know, during the adoption of low temperature heating and low carbon systems, you're going to get these early adopters. You're going to get these people that are going to embrace the new technology. But put yourself in the consumer's shoes now, and they've got 4 people quoting. 3 are quoting for a boiler, and 1 is quoting for, say, a heat pump. It's where does the consumer go for that standard? Where does the consumer reach out to? And I think that goes back to a previous comment about from someone who raised in the from the question, is that consumer needs that awareness. Really, it's not just the installers that have got to be relied upon to sell low carbon. It's got to come from industry. It's got to come from government. But yeah, that will help bring down the costs of the whole process, I think.
And just on cost, David was at one for Ian. I think, have you seen David's question just about, you know, MCS is quite difficult and costly to achieve.
Yeah.
You know, could you give some advice for people with small businesses?
Yeah, good question. Thank you, David. And I think it sort of follows on from what Paul was saying. You know, if people don't see value in something, they start to question the cost. So I think the changes and of course I would advocate MCS, but the new MCS. So the new MCS, which we published start of a process of simplification, we published a new version of MCS 001, which is the core standard, which starts to take away some of the things that have been assumed maybe about MCS over the years and have grown in the telling. That's the way I like to think of it. So what's the minimum requirement? We're not reducing standards. In fact, standards are really important, especially when consumers are not as informed, and we've just had that discussion. They're not as informed. They don't understand this technology, so they do need to be protected and reassured. But standards need to be high to protect the integrity of the industry we're all part of. But actually getting to them and achieving them needs to make sure, and that process needs to make sure that it assesses what a business has already got. You know, it doesn't ask for things that are ridiculous to the size of the business. And I think a one-size-fits-all certification experience, yes, we all need to be compliant with the standard, but that needs to be commensurate with, you know, 1-man, 2-man, 3-woman band versus something that is 100 installers. I think the scheme of the future will be much more about a risk-based approach. So if you're compliant year after year, then we should reward that compliance, and that's what MCS is planning to do over the next few years, versus identifying those cowboys, I guess, in the sector that bring it all down, that causes all issues, and the larger players will attract more attention from MCS. So I think I totally understand where David and others are coming from, and that is essentially why I'm here as the new chief of MCS. I want to change it to adapt to the new market we're seeing.
Great, thanks, Ian. Just one more specific question, just to hear from Joey, perhaps for you, Paul. He asked, will we be embracing hydraulic separation as standard to ensure all low temperature heat sources can be applied regardless of their delta T?
It's a really good question, actually. And again, we've sort of touched on this in a lot of articles. You know, for example, underfloor heating. An example of that is You know, you've got 3 floors, 3 manifolds. I know it's quite rare because normally you have underfloor heating on the ground floor and you might have radiators on the next floor. We've got potentially 3 to 4 pumps in the house. 3 mixer valves on each manifold, all running at, you know, your upstairs, your downstairs is running on a screeded system, high mass, high output, doesn't require such flow temperatures, but your upstairs floors are running on much smaller delta T's for getting that higher flow rate for higher output. So it's a fair point, and we're trying to educate in that scenario. You would put hydraulic separation before each manifold as well to segregate that, because it's all depends on the heat generator. What is the output of that heat generator? If the whole house needs 80 watts per square metre, say, then, and you've got different heat generators like underfloor heating and radiators, you will have varying flow temperature requirements. So that's an example. It's a really good point of an example of hydraulic separation as well, to stop pumps pumping other pumps, because we don't want pumping series. That's another thing. That's just an example of hydraulic separation in practice.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to take one more question, and then I'm going to ask you guys all to wrap up as well, because time is sort of flowing. But Neil's asking, saying, surely if they're not already, the Energy Savings Trust needs to get involved on consumer education for this. Are they involved? Ilias, could you give us a word on what's going on there?
You repeat this question because I
towards
the end.
Neil asks, if they're not already, surely the Energy Savings Trust, the EST, needs to get involved on consumer education for low carbon and low temperature heating.
So I think the Energy Saving Trust has an important role to play, and I'm sure they're very active. I think what I wanted to add to this is that the consumer piece is key. Cost, there will be a higher cost. People are used to certain propositions and way of using their heat, but I think I wouldn't underestimate the ability of the consumer to adjust with awareness. So, you know, we see greater awareness and appeal of electric cars. I remember when not smoking in pubs would have been a controversial measure, and you know, in the 80s, and it was controversial to wear a seatbelt. So, you know, organizations like EST, but you know, the industry and others have an important role to play, and sort of explaining also the contribution consumers can make in terms of their own heat use. You know, it is a major challenge, but perhaps there are ways to sort of educate consumers and you know, make them understand how they can work with government and industry to find solutions.
Yeah. Could I ask a couple of just comments from guys on the panel here about, you know, where do you see actually, we might see more, you know, technical innovation in the future? What do you think will be areas that, you know, that you'd see like to see some focus on, or that you're most sort of excited about?
Yeah, so again, we've been looking at thermal battery. You know, the role of the battery in general, but the thermal battery, I mean, there's technology out there which uses phase change materials that can hold more energy, has a higher energy density in the same space that you would have with a normal cylinder. So we're seeing that adoption starting to move. Hence why I think from an education perspective, we need to make sure that these technologies and these new technologies that are on the horizon are embedded in education at an early stage as well. That's critical because that helps adoption as well. It's a difficult market, and Martyn will agree, and so with the rest of the panel. It's a really hard market to bring a new technology into this industry. It's historically very sort of traditional. So it's a challenge, but that would be my one, and I'd be interested to hear everyone else. But thermal batteries is quite exciting for me.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Maybe I'll go to Mark. Would you like to?
Yeah, I think there are potentially opportunities with thermal batteries, phase change materials for storage of energy, hot water and the like. I think it was Martyn made the comment earlier about we're potentially moving from a mass combi market to a market with more stored water. And that's a huge challenge in the property. The airing cupboard was taken out when the combi went in often, and there's no space for the store to go back in. So that's an area where innovation could come into things and making life of the installer easier as well. And just to follow up on what Paul said, I think it is very, very important to keep the skills of the industry fresh. And there's a role for colleges and apprenticeships. There's a role for manufacturers with ongoing education with new materials, new products, but there's also a role for continual professional development as new things happen in the industry. Those almost bite-sized chunks of learning can happen to keep the skills fresh and keep the skills at a maximum level. And
even, I know, Mark, just another one on the professional learning, like actually, maybe more remote, more virtual training. Would that help given
yeah,
what we're talking about?
4 months ago, I'd have had a very different answer to this.
Yeah.
What we've learned in the last 4 months is that we can adapt, we can be flexible, and training can be delivered in a blended way. We've been limited to the virtual training in the last few months because of lockdown, but that is now sort of embedded both in the minds of the training providers, manufacturers, and the like, and also in the minds of the trainees, because they're now willing to sit in front of a Zoom session for an hour or so and absorb what's given to them. There's a lot of other blended ways of learning, self-learning, video banks of information, simulations and the like. And I think all of this will come to the fore in the coming months. So maybe energy storage and thermal batteries, etc., as technical innovations, but certainly innovations in way we learn and way we train.
Brilliant, great. And I think one of my final questions is going to be, if you guys had one wish for the future, how can industry work together to really accelerate the market adoption? What would be
for me?
Yeah, go for
me. I'd like to capitalise, and I'd like to see industry pull together even more now. I mean, I've witnessed it over the last, Mark's been part of the group that we're leading, CIPHE, and we're all pulling together. I'd like to see a lot more unity. I'd like to see, and again, we try our best to engage with the installer when we call this education a product. The worst thing you want to do is create a product for your customer, what you think they might like. So we go to the pains and gains. You've got to look at your customer, you've got to look at the installer and think, how can I solve his pains? How can I give him some gains? And then I reach back and then I'll come and create something that works for him. And that's what, for me, it's talking to the installer more, engaging with the installer, because they're the guys who are going to deliver the decarbonisation of heat. So that's my view.
Thanks, Paul.
I think there's a vibrant discussion on the future heating mix, and there's a lot of innovation, but it feels like from a policy perspective, the whole debate around low temperature heating and skills is something that the whole industry can agree on. And, it feels like if I had a wish, it would be great to see collaboration in this space. And it would be also great on the back of this collaboration to see the government acting upon it in policy and regulation.
Thanks. Martyn, I might go to you next.
I'm quite refreshed actually from working with Versais in recent years. I think they've come a long way. They've been quite communicative with us. I can't remember in recent years actually having quite so much consultation and requests for input and advice. So I think they've turned a great corner and are really asking the industry, here's our problem, how can we best get round this? And there won't be a person in the room or watching this or listening to this who doesn't disagree with the target of net zero carbon. When you see temperatures which we're experiencing in the Antarctic at the moment, there is a problem. I'm quite enthusiastic that they are really trying to engage with us, and so far it's been very positive. They started this route with Boiler Plus. They had greater ambitions than they actually achieved with Boiler Plus, and we managed to, didn't intentionally, we didn't want to, try and water it down, but we were just being practical and sensible. So consequently, what came out was a very achievable thing to do. This is a lot more tougher than that, but with the way they've started out, I think we're going to get there. I do agree that there perhaps needs to be more enforcement then. So BEIS are the ones who sort of create the policy, if you want. It then gets generally enshrined into the building regulations, and that's enforced by another government department, MHCLG. So until there is a bit more oversight in that area, then I'm afraid we may have an uncompetitive market, but they're not unaware of this. They do know that they need to raise the bar a bit and raise the game to actually get everybody, virtually pricing for the same type of specification when a job's needed. Going to the technology thing, I'm with the others. I think hot water storage, there's a lot of creativity needed there, a lot of wasted space in houses. Even small houses, there's that huge gap between the kitchen cupboards and the ceiling. There's a gap underneath the bath panel. So these phase change materials can be quite small, quite flexible, and they could be stashing away the equivalent amount of heat that a 36-gallon cylinder could hold. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And of course, we still are creating hydrogen boilers, high temperature heat pumps, things of that ilk. So it's a good, exciting time to be in the industry.
Yeah, there's a few different things there. Thanks, Martyn. Mark, kind of final word for you on your wish.
Final word from me, yeah. Low carbon is part of the future, and low temperature systems go hand in hand with that. There are immediate benefits to low temperature systems, because even condensing boilers will benefit from them, as would hydrogen boilers and the like, as well as heat pumps. So taking the opportunity to upskill, refresh, or retrain is always going to be positive. It's the role of the industry to work together. We've got to come together, and this initiative has been fairly good. And we have to work across multiple levers with policy, skills, quality, funding, and consumer engagement. So there's a lot of people to come together to move this forward.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. And Ian.
Just echoing what other people have said, and particularly Mark there. I think now is the time to collaborate even more, and especially some of the opportunities we've got around sharing digital platforms. I think some of the things that Paul's been leading on actually are really inventive, exciting, about enabling the sector it can be. And so there can't be these divisions between organisations. We've got to knock those down and start to see how we can all contribute to the future.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ian. And on that, I was going to pass it back to Paul.
Yeah, sorry, mate. I'm following on from Mark's comments and then Ian's. We need to go to government with a solution. I've sat in that many meetings, and all people do is throw up problems. Now's the time for industry to pull together and come up with a solution that government can move with. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do here.
In simple terms, that's your word. Fantastic. And just want to say also that this recording will be sent out next week as well. And thanks so much to everyone who's put in so many questions. We couldn't get through all of them, but we will get answers back to them. I believe the CIPHE, Paul, and Tim, who's sat behind the scenes here, would absolutely be able to get some answers from a lot of them. So I want to thank everyone for such an engaging discussion here, and thank everyone who came on for your time as well, and thank you so much for joining. As part of this Net Zero Festival week, hopefully you've found inspiration, some insight, and some motivation as well. Now to kind of move forward with this. Paul, would you just like to say anything in terms of kind of next steps, or if people want to get hold of some of the information that's come back from the consultation?
Yeah, so yeah, feel free to reach out if anyone wants to, if you've got anything they want to feed in or anything like that, because we're going to be actively moving at pace. We've got some really interesting projects going on. Again, you know, like I mentioned about testing things with installers, we've got an installer group, members, and we engage with them regularly and get their feedback. So, you know, if we're testing a bit of digital technology, we'll put it in the hands of the installer and say, does this work for you? Got some exciting stuff going on. It's a great time in the industry. It's a great time to enter the industry. Exciting times ahead.
Great. And on that note, I'll say thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon. Thank you very much for joining.